I'm back. How you doing? Basecamp. Here we go.
Series we have done. Anything you want to say that we would add on to the beginning of this, now that you've seen the whole thing?
Yeah, having spent the vast majority of my life thinking the concept of an afterlife was both ridiculous and impractical.
That track series where we talk about our religious beliefs. If you're new to the channel, that's why the gear was red this time. It is warning you. This is going to be extremely controversial interpretations, maybe the
Oh, I love that I'm going to get a copyright notice. Thank you for that opening.
most controversial of all of the track series we have done. Anything you want to say that we would add on to the beginning of this, now that you've seen the whole thing? All of the track series we have done. Anything you want to say that we would add on to the beginning of this, now that you've seen the whole thing?
So
Yeah, having spent the vast majority of my
in the beginning, she was kind of Nosferatu-y, and now she's back to Puritan-y.
life thinking the concept of an afterlife was both ridiculous and impractical, also not very plausible based on all the descriptions of it. You've just presented to me something that actually seems compelling, but also based in our current understanding of physics and science. Definitely a paradigm shift for me.
Is he just brainwashing
Yeah,
her?
it's a
Is
paradigm shift.
this is just the long the long I'm going to say tracking or documentary of a weird dude brainwashing his slightly autistic wife? Is that what's going on?
For me as well, and that's why I made it so long, to make sure I left no argument untouched.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows, right? Our whole thing is, if we're wrong, we want someone to be right, and that's why we're glad so many people disagree with us. But I think you're really onto something here, and I have fewer qualms with your arguments than I do with the typical arguments of most other religious traditions. Well, all other religious traditions that I've been introduced to and I've read about, whose texts I've reviewed. So,
Well, we'll see. Is this going to be my Rubyard take, Simone? My 10-hour video?
I mean, everyone has a moment.
Because in this one, we are going to go over
ABS.
what I believe the Bible says happens to people after they die, what the Bible says about the human soul. And in both of these cases, it is not what the mainstream Christians would argue, which I think comes down from beliefs around like Elysium and Tartarus, and is much closer to Greek conceptions of what happens after death than original Christians, or I think correct Christian conceptions or Jewish conceptions, where the modern Christians believe that like you immediately go to heaven when you die, which is a supernatural plane, which actually creates a bunch of logical problems for other lines in the text. And people can be like, no, that definitely happens. There's definitely a heaven or hell. Like, doesn't the Bible talk about like Gehenna? And it's like, well, Gehenna was a place. Like, we know where it was.
So at least while I was away, I was putting up other kinds of media. At least I was doing that. I've been sick like a dog, man. It's been terrible.
And the way
I'm transferring stores, and I'm also applying for other jobs. And a buddy of mine just told me that if I applied for his particular store, he would hire me. Well, unofficially. I mean, who knows? He might not be able to.
It's described in the Bible makes it pretty clear in those passages. It is talking about a place. Or doesn't the Bible talk about humans having spirits or souls? And I'm like, actually, if you go to the original,
anyone have questions about China? Feel free to ask.
Being used there, it's usually saying something else, like it's talking about breath or being alive, like the life left his body, not the spirit left his body. Or you can be like, well, what about Lazarus? What about Lazarus? There was the time when Jesus talked about hell, right, in that one parable. And it goes, well, unfortunately, and we'll get into this in a lot more detail, the word used in the Lazarus.
No bird flu, thank God. Just good old-fashioned eating nasty food in a foreign country that I knew not to eat, but I ate anyway because I was with friends and family. They took me to a roadside restaurant where they actually killed the animals in front of you if you wanted to watch them. It was a fish they killed, and it was a chicken. And they killed the chicken in front of the other chickens. And I was like, dude, that's so mean. That's so cruel.
This parable was not Sheol, the Jewish hell. It was literally Hades. which creates a universe problem, because that unfortunately, if he didn't mean that as a parable to get his story across to somebody with a Greek worldview, it means that he is canonizing.
We're crossing the
every single-
canons. It's like now there's
crossing
suddenly Gandalf is talking to Darth Vader, and it's getting a little.
Now, look, I don't agree with where they're going to go. Not that I know where they're going to go, but just from what I'm listening and what I know about them, I don't agree where they're going to go. But I do think this is funny how, because the Koine Greek is Greek, they do have Jesus crossing canons. So you do have a, if you want to be an absolute literalist. Now you got to take this way out of context, but you have the Hebrew God in the personification of man in his incarnate form, legitimatizing, at least in the Gospels, Hades and Tartarus. That is an irony. That is interesting. Let's see Derek figure out that, huh?
A little bit awkward. What's happening?
Please allow me to finish this because it's going to seem like a bit of a jump. We see Thanos, who was the villain teased at the end of the first Avengers movie. If he holds the reality gem, that means he can jump from different realities. This will be our link to the Marvel universe from the Star Wars universe.
Is this an audience or a mosaic? Hey, how you doing? Looking good. Nice dress.
So, Hades, you finally made it. How are things in the underworld?
Well, they're just fine. You know, a little dark, a little gloomy, and as always, hey, full of dead people.
And there's a reason he didn't use the Jewish conception of hell to change the same parable.
Okay.
So the point of the parable is, if somebody was dead and they came back to life and said, you should follow the rules that are set out by the old teachers, even then a person wouldn't believe them.
It looked great. The food looked great. But no, yeah, as soon as it hit my lips went on fire. And it burnt all the way down my throat, and my stomach was just, it wasn't like I had a stomach ache, but it was like I was mildly nauseous for the next 2 weeks. It was just not a great thing. When I got home, the docs gave me every test imaginable, and then they gave me this weird dental digestive, it's not even cream, it's like a powder that I put on my lips, and then, but anyway, I've been getting better, so yay.
The problem is, if he framed the story with a traditional Jewish understanding of hell, the dead person would neither be conscious or in pain, so they would have no motivation to go back and warn their family. So he needed to use another culture's conception of hell to create this story.
Yeah, the plot can't work with the Jewish hell. I see.
Yeah, so it seems pretty clear that wasn't what was intended by that. But
So
we'll go
they're
into that
switching between two different takes, it looks like, or at least two different sessions.
a lot more detail when you consider other parts that explicitly say that this stuff didn't exist, which are more commonly ignored.
Do you see Swiper?
Oh, my Twitter is now verified. So I have X. You guys can go on there, and I'm actually a legitimate person on there now. So, yay. I have a check mark. I didn't earn it. I paid for it. Word.
Where? Bitch, is you blind?
Now, I went over a bit of this with you.
By the way, I'm broke. I got to pay taxes. I don't know how I'm going to break taxes. So anyone want to help me pay my taxes, feel free to send me cash. just hit that. Hit those super chats, buddies. All 1,000 viewers, all 1 million viewers, all 1 billion viewers out there.
Going into all this, Simone, what was your thoughts on this as I went into it with you?
Well, honestly, the problem is you explain all this to me and everything just makes sense. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Because I didn't come into this with anything more than a...
Honestly, she could play a witch. Like, if you take off the glasses, she could play a witch. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Witches are sexy, but she could play a witch.
Culture understanding of Christianity, which never made sense.
Ooh, a shape-shifting witch that can go between a male and a female, right?
Yeah.
Also, an atheist's understanding of Christianity, which I think is divorced from what
I live
most
in
Christians
Texas, so I have property tax, so I got to pay tax on the house.
attending church are sort of led to believe that, like, oh, Christians believe that you go to heaven after you die. Kind of like whatever's depicted in The Simpsons, you know?
And then it's like, but also, don't Christians believe that we're all brought back to life in a future kingdom? Like, why are we all brought back to life if heaven's already operational?
Yeah, and then there's, you know,
So actually, people don't go to heaven. That's actually the joke. So everyone from Derek to, I don't know if Kip makes this mistake, but everyone from Derek to Leophilius to Godless Cranium, you're all wrong. The actual Bible doesn't teach that you go to heaven. Believe it or not, oh, what's his name? Rodimus Dedimus. What's his name? Redeemed Zoomer. He actually has a great video on this explaining how the Bible doesn't teach that you go to heaven. It never does. It never says you go to heaven. That's just an assumption people make. It's not in the Bible, guys. There's no promise of heaven. There's the new kingdom, which is either the new kingdom here on earth or the new kingdom after the earth is completely destroyed and all matter has ceased to exist. So, either way, you're not actually getting into heaven. You're getting into the new kingdom and having eternal life, which is not anything like a life as it is now. So no one's married, no one has kids, and no one's like everything that you think matters in this world won't matter in the next. That's what the Bible actually says. Just FYI. And it doesn't even say
No,
that
and then I
that
hear
explicitly.
about hell, and there's all these cartoon devils and people talking about hell and threatening hell, and I read the Divine Comedy, and then I read the Bible, and I'm like, where's hell? I'm looking for hell. Where's hell? And it's not showing up, and I'm getting really confused. So when you come at me and you explain things this
Shoal. He went to Shoal.
way, I'm like, oh, of course, right. That now it makes sense. Of course.
More than any of the tracks we've done so far, writing this one has, for me, really deepened my faith in this worldview because it harmonizes so well with a scientific understanding of reality. And it has given me a different perception on how religion can relate to science in a way that has made me rethink a lot of fundamental things I thought I knew about Christianity, which it turns out were middle-aged myths that were staple gunned into Christianity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It to me, it almost feels irresponsible that these myths have been
Well, there's two different characters. There's Dives and there's Lazarus. They're not the same story. Stop, sweetie. Get out. Get out. Go. No, you're gonna start dancing and being in heat. Go. I don't want to get stretched. Go. Go away. Before you start scratching me. No. Go away. No, you're in heat. Go away. I don't want to deal with that. Go. She's not fixed, so she's in heat. So I'm tossing her out of the room. No, so Dives and also those are parables. They're not literal stories. BS. None of the parables are literal stories. Not even for the Protestants are they literal stories. So I don't know where you and a few of the other atheists come in saying that they are literal stories. There's no Protestant tradition, no Orthodox tradition, no Catholic tradition that says the parables are literal. So where are you getting the literalness from? I've always wanted to ask that. I just keep on forgetting to ask it because you always get caught up in theological questions. But where are you getting the idea that these are literal if literally they're called parables? I mean, just the mere fact that they're called parables, that they're basically it's not fairy tales. So what's a parable? Fables. They're basically fables. I don't even understand how atheists come to think of them as literal stories. Like that doesn't even make sense. No, they're parables, dude. A fable is not. There's no falsehood or truthhood to it. There's no. The only value in it is the lesson learned. It's a moral. And this is a very Jewish and also very ancient culture way of talking and speaking. In fact, it's a very Southern way of speaking. Where I grew up, parables and fables were the way to go. I know it's unpopular, but the black, what is it? It's the black something. Anyway, the it's a jackrabbit and it's a fox. It has I can't say I can't say the name of the main animal because then I would get banned. But it's black folklore from the South, and it's really good. Parables don't have to be grounded in reality. You think the Three Little Pigs are grounded in reality? I don't think the three little pigs are grounded in reality, buddy. I think the moral of the lesson of don't listen to strangers is a true lesson. But and to be prepared and to build a solid home, I mean, those are the basic fundamental lessons you're learning from these stories. Anyway, continuing.
Perpetuated for as long as they have been. How have people let this fly when it's almost like continuing to practice bloodletting and the application of leeches well past the development of the scientific method and our understanding that there's no evidence-based support for it?
Okay, Jordan Peterson, dragons are real too then. You're going to go that route, BS.
It's so weird because you can go back to the Bible, and I mean, at least the clergy in the height of the Catholic Church could reference doctrine and be like, "Well, guys, actually, hell, heaven."
Well, and if you look at biblical scholars, they'll be like, "Yeah, it does seem true that like ancient Jews didn't believe in a heaven or hell as we understand it. They believed that there was a."
Selah, I literally have like 6 videos on my channel describing why I believe the Bible is true, why I believe Christianity is true, why I believe the Catholic Church is true, and then the 4th video that I just released is why I believe God is true. My next 4 videos in that series are going to be why I don't believe atheism is true. I don't know if I'm going to combine it with anti-theism. Why I don't believe Protestantism is true. Why I don't believe Buddhism is true. And I'm sorry to say, it's going to be why I don't believe Islam is true. That's going to be the ones that I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to do Buddhism, if I'm going to do Hinduism, to be honest about it. I think I'm going to do Buddhism just because I don't know enough about Hinduism to make a really good refutation outside of I don't believe in reincarnation.
What they would have called heaven is the world to come, which is when
BS, did you watch my video on why I believe God is true?
everyone's raised from the dead, which is a completely different concept. And
if you did, why haven't you done a response to it? I'm literally your friend. I'm literally a Christian. I'm literally your enemy on YouTube, and you still haven't done. You literally have an inside source. You can call me. I think you and Gar are the only two that have my actual phone number. You could actually call me and like ask me questions for your video.
was, I guess, in hell were revealed with Jesus, I guess you could say. But why would they be revealed with Jesus? And why do they just happen
Kip doesn't even have my phone number. You know what I'm saying?
to not be recorded that they were revealed by Jesus? And why did they just happen to be remarkably close to the understanding of the afterlife that the dominant culture that this was spreading, Roman culture, would have had, i.e. Tartarus and Elysium? So we'll get to all that, but it makes a lot more sense when you drop the Tartarus and Elysium.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I never saw it. I never got an alert or anything. So if the algorithm yeeted it, I never saw it. It doesn't even send email notifications anymore. So I don't even have a workaround. If the algorithm decides it's not appropriate, I'd never see it.
Heaven actually, and what the Bible describes doesn't just correlate with science. It's almost the most logical way you could view reality.
One thing we've heard from some religious leaders is that they agree with a lot of what you're saying. And they're like, yeah, that's what most people who actually deeply study religion have concluded as well. It's just that we don't talk with the public about that because they can't handle it. And do you think that that's what's going on here? Do you think that that's why these views are not pervasive and mainstream, despite the fact that if you really do a...
Hey, Thomas.
close reading of texts, that this is what you're probably going to conclude?
Yeah, it is really interesting. Is it like super like Jewish history nerds, Christian history nerds who are like really into their faith? They typically don't bristle that much at what we say. They're like, oh yeah, a lot of this stuff makes sense.
Yeah, and Mormons too. Yeah, like several different religions. That's a crazy thing.
And it's the casual sort of, well, because there's sort of two religions that are superimposed, and we'll get into this, which one I call Sunday school Christianity, and then there's real Christianity, which is what's in the Bible. And Sunday school Christianity, I think people can be Sunday school Christians and have an incredible amount of conviction that they...
I wouldn't call them Sunday school Christians. I would say there's a level of static, like fuzz, like old TV static, old TV fuzz. When you go into a church, especially a high, what is it called? High church? Basically Anglican, Lutheran, Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic. I can't think of any other high liturgies, but anything that has like a high, very liturgical church, there's enough static that it's possible to go into the service, do the ritual, and get nothing out of it. So it's not just Sunday school Christianity. There's a level of ritual that overtakes what you're learning, and so you don't get any theology. You don't get anything on what your religion actually teaches. And this happens a lot. This happens a lot to Catholics. There's a lot of This is why people say, "Oh, Catholics don't read their Bible." It's not because they don't. I mean, literally in Mass, they're giving three different readings every single Mass. But because you're participating in the ritual, you're not actually listening to the sermon. You're not actually listening to the Mass. You're not listening to the liturgy. You're doing your part. You sing the lines or whatever, and you can't even remember what it is that you read. And this happens to me. If I don't read the mass, the missal before mass, or if I don't read the missal after mass, and you ask me what we did in the mass, I remember the homily and that's it. Yeah, and this is true for most Christians. In most high church Christianity, you're getting nothing. You're getting no catechesis is the word that's used. It's kind of inappropriate here for what we're talking about, but it's basically what it is. It's just you get nothing. You go into the church, you do the rituals, you're saved, you do the confession, you do all the stuff, but you don't know why you're doing it, you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know what you believe. And it becomes folk Christianity or folk Catholicism. And it's then it becomes cultural. From folk Christianity, it then becomes cultural Christianity. And once you're a cultural Christian, there's no rules, there's no nothing. There's the devil, there's hell, there's heaven. There's praying for a parking space, praying that you pass the test you didn't study for, and that's it. Like that's where you're at. I'm a good person, I'm going to go to heaven. You're a bad person, you're going to go to hell. That's it. That's the level of Christian most people are. And in low churches, it's a way worse problem. But in high churches, this happens all the time, where it's the static.
Know what they're talking about when they are reading things that in some cases look like they may have been deliberately misinterpreted when you go back to the original words. We'll get into a few cases of that. And so they just haven't gone through like every word in important passages that edify like huge parts of their world perspective.
So in other words, it's kind of like pop science versus academic research science.
Yes, and then there's the urban monoculture person who's like, trusts the science. And you're like, well, if you actually go to the scientists, you're like, and all those scientists are wrong, they're not real. And it's like, well, I know a lot of scientists, and most of them, not real scientists. So anyway, let's dig into this. This tract is called A God of the Gats is a God of Ignorance. Supernatural is a word that some individuals use to denote things that can't be reliably measured, tested, or have predictable effects upon reality. They will claim that this makes these things above the quote-unquote real things. But I think this framing is easily seen through as cope. Many used to believe heaven was a place in the stars, but then science got better and we could see the solar system. So something that was a real place became a supernatural one. Supernatural is all the stuff science and technology pushed off the table of reality. This is where the God of the Gaps comes from. Science move in and explain things like how we make decisions, how love is created, and as it encroaches, the purview of the soul retreats further and further. When instead, what we should be saying is the thing the Bible describes as human sentience, life, our emotions, we understand that thing now. That thing is the brain and not an incorporeal soul. But surely admitting this...
It's funny. I just finished reading... No... Leave me alone. I'm busy. Go bother your boyfriend. Your boyfriend's in the living room. Go bother him. Go bother your boyfriend. Anyway, I just finished reading Wrestling, We Who Wrestle with God, and Jordan Peterson has the exact same theory they're espousing here, except that Jordan thinks that the Bible somehow understood that he was talking about the mind or the brain. It's an interesting idea.
Would cause problems with the Bible, right? There is no way somebody writing between the 5th and 2nd century CE would have known that unless they had divine guidance. Well,
Well, we do believe in divine guidance if we're Christians, so I'm just saying you're SOL.
Let's turn to Ecclesiastes. Quote, and this absolutely shocked me when I read it. As for humans, God tests.
Is there an echo? Do I need my headset? Are we good? If there's no echo, we're going to keep going. If there's an echo, let me know so I can put on the headset.
Them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both.
You're wondering why I'm eating the apple? One, I'm hungry. Two, I got a complaint that eating the apple last time was distracting and annoying. So I'm eating the apple again.
As one dies, so does the other. All have the same breath. Now, this is a word used for souls in many other parts of the Bible. Humans have no advantage over animals. I love how you translate it to breath there, but then like later in the same verse, it translates it to spirit.
Yeah, so this is something else that Inspiring Philosophy and Jordan Peterson points out. The Bible never says animals don't have souls. In fact, depending on how you read it, the Bible explicitly says they have souls. No, does it mean animals are getting into heaven? I don't know. I'm not going that far. I'm not going as far as Inspiring Philosophy, but yeah, technically speaking, animals do have souls.
Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upwards, if the spirit of the animal goes down into earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? So let's break down what's saying here. First, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. That's very clear. Okay, here it is stating in no uncertain terms that man does not have a soul that is different from the souls of animals, but not just that, God.
So he's saying it backwards. Man does have a soul, but so do the animals. All of them have a pneuma, have the breath of God, the spark of God for life.
Test us to make sure that we know that, and to deny that is a sin, because that's to deny God's will. Okay, sure, but we go to heaven after death, right? Then quote, surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both.
There's no heaven in the Old Testament, so they got this wrong completely.
As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same spirit, breath, whatever word you want to use here. Humans have no advantage over the animals, end quote. Yes, it's super clear on that point. Now, the next line is really interesting, and it is mistranslated in the version I am using. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return, end quote. Now, the word that is translated here as meaningless can be translated as meaningless, but it also means transient or evanescent, which is much better in context, which means that what is really being said here is your existence as a human is a fleeting one, and when you die, you become dirt. Okay. But what if you disagree? What if you think you know more than God? Well, a convention that's established here in the text is to say, quote, who knows X? Like, because it says this right afterwards, for who can bring them to see what will happen after them, end quote. To point out some type of information that God knows and man does not. So whenever it says, who knows X, it's saying God knows X. Okay. So then if you, after reading that first part, are like, no, man definitely goes up to heaven and animals definitely go down below, then it says, quote, who knows if the human spirit rises upwards and if the spirit of the animal goes down to earth, end quote. Basically predicting this kind of heresy and telling the person committing it to knock it off, pointing out that they don't know as much as God does. So it gives you the answer up front. The same thing happens to you that happens to animals. You have the same type of soul as animals. God specifically is testing to make sure you know this. To deny this is a sin. And then it says, do you think you know more than God, human? Who would know this? I, God, would know this. Then it goes on into what can only be thought of as the perfect techno-Puritan mantra, further edifying our beliefs. Quote, so I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them?
Anybody know what they're quoting?
End quote. As we have pointed out, your emotional state and relation to things like work is fundamentally under your control, and to indulge in a negative emotional state is a sin. Approach work with a plum. This tract will go into the Sunday schoolification of the idea of a soul that is separate from our brains and bodies and the concept of heaven. The Bible is extremely clear, as we will be going over. Your soul is not separate from your brain. And after you die, if you serve God well, you are raised.
Again, this is why in Catholicism we believe that people are composite beings, soul and body. They're not separate.
Raised again with a different type of body at some point in the future. Heaven and hell, let's say, are taught in public schools. There is the heaven, the world to come. They are not Christian or Jewish conceptions, but pagan Greek conceptions, which are state.
Wrong. Close, but no cigar. You made the same mistake a lot of the scholars make. It's actually Xanthurian. It comes from the Babylonian exile. These are Babylonian beliefs that are imported into Judaism. But you played the game and made the same mistake the scholars make.
Stapled onto Christianity by people who wanted to believe the ancient Greek scholars were better than divine revelation. But also, this is kind of obvious when you think about what Sunday school Christians, as we will call them, believe. So ancient Jews and what is written in the Bible say that.
Again, Sunday school Christians is the wrong designation. It should be folk Christianity and cultural Christians. You could also maybe say lapsed Catholics or holiday only Christians, like the Christians who go to the funeral, the wedding, Easter, Christmas. I don't know, pick two more. They only go to like church like 6 times a year. But there's also the ones that go every Sunday, but they don't hear anything because of the static.
When you die in the future, your body is resurrected, but somehow different. Ancient Greek.
That's called the glorified body, and that's only in the New Testament.
Believed that what happened when you died is if you were favored by the gods, your soul was taken to Elysium, and if not, it was taken to Tartarus. Well, early Christians attempted to staple these two beliefs together and ended up creating a rather silly conjunction. In this conjunction, we have both people going to either heaven or hell, but then also everyone comes back to life with different bodies. Like, what? So one day God just shuts down heaven and reopens on earth. It's like he goes around telling all the souls in heaven, and he's like,
So this is one of the mistakes that Derek from Myth Vision makes, is that he conflates Christian mythos with what's in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. It's all tradition. So him trying to make connections to what tradition says through biblical passages that seem to reflect what, I don't know, some ancient pagan myth says is completely nonsensical. The Christians and Jews of this period did not have access to that information. They didn't know. They don't know what the mystery cults are teaching. So it's the wrong inference. Now you could say that the writers of the new gospels, not Peter, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, whatever, but the actual scribes, maybe when they were composing these scripts, they knew. And those who knew enough of the dual languages or multiple languages here, Latin, Greek, Mesopotamia, Babylonian, Sumerian, Egyptian, Coptic, whatever, Hebrew, they could blend the stories in the writing, but that's not what's happening in the actual narrative. Well, that's another mistake that Derek makes all the time. He's assuming that there are connections that just are not possible. Not that they're not interesting. They're awesome implications. Jordan Peterson does this all the time, but when Derek does it, Derek is doing the exact same thing he gets angry at Jordan Peterson for doing. He's anachronistically, or in this case, anachroculturally, I don't know what the right word would be, but he's stealing from a culture that the people composing the Bible and the people who actually were there for the actual events just didn't have access to. So again, the scribes may have, but the oral tradition that it stems from and the history of the actual events cannot be drawing from these things. You just can't. So it's a conundrum. I mean, if you want to say divine inspiration, then that gets around the problem of lack of information, and we can get around the information flow problem. Yeah, then you can have the Bible making all these inferences. But if you can't get around, if you can't say that it's divine inspiration, then all these connections are anachronistic because we're making them now because we have access to all the information. The people at the time didn't. They weren't going around listening to each other's sects or each other's cults or each other's languages. They just weren't. It's vague, but I think there's something like even between, I want to say, Palace and meaning Athens and Sparta, there's like a language barrier. They talk about not being able to understand each other. That I think I don't know if it's the Spartans that say that the Greeks are close to the barbarians, or if it's the Athenians who say that the Spartans are close to barbarians. And barbarians here doesn't mean wild man. It just means that they talk bar 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 bar. Because the joke barbarian is that's what their words sound like. Their words sound like bar 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 bar. So Derek is imposing a lot of capabilities that we have now in history and language that just didn't exist in ancient times.
Come on, guys, it's moving day. With just a small amount of self-reflection, it's fairly obvious this belief is a childish piecing together of two views about the afterlife, one Christian/Jewish and one pagan. Does that even make sense why God would do this? If all the people he plans to resurrect are already in heaven or will soon die and go,
Someone needs to tell this guy to look up some information about Xanthurianism and Babylonian and Assyrian religions. I guess Neo-Sumerian and Neo-Babylonian as well.
to heaven, is their new revised state in any way significantly better than being in heaven?
So these influences come directly from these Babylonian cultures, from these Mesopotamian cultures. They don't come from the Greek, they come from the Mesopotamian. That doesn't mean the parallels aren't there, they're directly there, but it's the wrong culture. It's trying to say the Enuma Elish and the Atarasis is Greek in origin, and they're not. I know Hillman tries to make some kind of weird argument about that, but that's nonsense.
it is, then heaven is not heaven. And if it isn't, then what's the point of it? So if it is true that this is like a significantly better existence or fuller existence in heaven, then what heaven
Okay, so Catholics explaining this as fullness of truth. So progressive revelation, development of doctrine. When, excuse how this sounds, BS, but basically, God needed the Jewish people to be exiled into Babylon so they could get the concepts to be, when they came back, to be able to report accurately the theology that was necessary to lay the groundwork for Jesus. I know that's a stretch. I get it. But if you believe in the divine plan, that's exactly what happened. So you can think of it as the Jews had their hearts hardened so that way they would mess up, and God gave them an out with the prophets, but it was really so that way they could legitimately mess up. That way God could send in the army to take them away, which was already predicted in the older parts of the Bible, which might actually have been written afterward, but it's predicted to happen. They get sent into Mesopotamia. The rest of the tribes disappear. Doesn't matter. They'll all eventually come back in different groups, in different things, in different ways, but they will come back. Remember, from these rocks, I can make a people. I don't need the actual people to do it. I can bring it out of dirt. I can make a whole new set of people. I can bring the exact same people back. So God can do all of this. So he's not worried about it. His plan's going to come through either way. So he sends off the Israelites, the Judeans, to Mesopotamia, and he doesn't even send all of them. There's a remnant. There's always a remnant. And these people are the ones who are getting the theological information downloaded into their brains, into their cultures. That way they bring it back. And now we have angels and demons and heaven and hell. So it's Xanthurian. It's not Greek in any kind of way. I get it. The parallels seem really easy, but you're paralleling the wrong parallels. And you're confusing language usage because Greek is the culture that dominates in, or the language that dominates the elites in Judea. Which again, the poor people would have probably spoke Latin, so I really like that from Metatron, the YouTube creator, not the character in the Bible. Who's not even actually in the Bible. That's a long story. So that's what's going on there.
Heaven is that it's just the waiting room until the real afterlife can be built. This seems strictly worse than just dying and then waking up in the sparkling.
This is also where the concept of purgatory comes in from Catholics.
But I are in a moment from your.
Because the medieval theologians had the exact same problem. And their solution was limbo and purgatory. So there's a structure that's no longer used, which is hell, and hell has 7 levels. There's limbo, purgatory, heaven, and there's 7 heavens. And there's 7 different types of heavens. And then, after everything's done, there will be the new heaven, the new kingdom. And that's where we actually go. So, in this day you will reign with me in the kingdom of heaven. What is Jesus talking about? We have no idea.
Your perception, waking up with no perception of time having passed in the kingdom of heaven or in the kingdom of God, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which makes me think that when the gospel writers were writing, some of the theology was at odds with I'm going to call it the sayings of Jesus. Let's call it Q, or the sayings of Jesus. But some of the theology that had developed around Jesus was at odds with the things that Jesus had said. And this is why I think the Gospels are being honest, because their theology is not supported by the words they put in Jesus' mouth. Therefore, the words that Jesus said were probably the words the real Jesus really did say. That's my theory. I don't have any degrees, Dan. I just have an associate's. I don't have any credentials for massage like you. Like you. Dan. That's okay.
And what about the experience of being in this state? If souls experience time in this intermediate state, some people would have to wait thousands of years, while others would wait only moments before resurrection. This creates an inequality in the experience that's never mentioned in Scripture. If souls don't experience time in this state, which many people say because they go like, when you're with God, it's like time passes really quickly, then it's functionally identical to being immediately resurrected from the perspective of the deceased. So why did he make this secondary heaven?
This is what happened.
But see, this is also an incorrect understanding, because you're not going to be one with God until after all creation ceases, because matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So therefore, all that energy will go back to God, because God is the one who gave us life in the first place. So it goes back to Him, and we become one with God. And all that is not life, all that is evil, that is hell, that is whatever, will be swept away into the abyss, into the chasm. Again, these are all theological ideas that are making assumptions and based on implications in the Bible. And there's multiple steps to get to the theology from the implication.
That's when you die.
Which, in my opinion, means that the theology existed before it was written down.
This is what happens when you die. That is what happens when he dies. And that is what happens when they die. It's all very personal.
Why would God create an elaborate intermediate state only to later resurrect everyone in bodies? What theological purpose does this serve? Why
Is anybody still here?
Crucial cosmological feature explicitly described in Scripture?
If you're still watching, give me a 1. I think I got booted or deranked or something.
And it's all silly anyway, because prophecies in the Bible are almost exclusively, if not exclusively, temporal in nature, describing things that happen in the future, not that are currently happening in other planes of reality or faraway places. That would make this totally inconsistent with the way the rest of the Bible works. And now, if I was to explain these problems differently, the traditional supernatural interpretation has to reconcile two seemingly contradictory biblical concepts. The idea that believers are, quote, immediately present with the Lord, end quote, upon death, 2 Corinthians 5:8, and the conception of a bodily resurrection at the end of time, 1 Corinthians 15. This creates problems because if souls are already with God in heaven, why is bodily resurrection necessary? Why would souls need to, quote unquote, come back to
Yeah, that always struck me as so weird, like creepy, zombie-ish, you know, like those are gone. Like let it go.
Yeah. What happens to the experience of time for souls in this intermediate state? The technological interpretation resolves these tensions by recognizing that from different reference frames, both can simultaneously be true without contradiction. From a dying person's perspective, death occurs. The next conscious experience they have is resurrection in a new form.
Okay, we're only going to go 15 more minutes, guys. So if anyone's still watching, if we don't get the super chat, we're going to stop at an hour. And we'll continue on tomorrow. But yeah.
This is not perceived as a gap or a waiting period. This matches Paul's description
If we do get a super chat, we'll go an extra 30 minutes.
of being, quote, changed in the twinkling of an eye, end quote. From God's perspective, existing outside normal temporal constraints, the person's consciousness/information can be preserved at the moment of death. This information can be used to reconstruct.
Hey, Thomas, I appreciate you, man. I was starting to get viewers, and then everyone disappeared. I don't know what that's about. Maybe it was the Apple. Maybe it was something else algorithmic.
Them at a new form at any point. No intermediate, quote unquote, holding area or waiting room is needed. The consciousness is effectively, quote unquote, with God immediately while being resurrected, quote, at the last day, end quote. The interpretation eliminates the need for complex theological explanations of intermediate state, aligns with biblical descriptions of death as, quote unquote, sleep.
For those watching on X, feel free to ask questions, challenge me, whatever. I'm down. It's all good.
Matches the Jewish understanding of resurrection without requiring.
I think I'm going to also do a show on Kicking on Rumble. I'm not sure exactly how I want to do that, but I think I want to start trying to build a community there as well.
Greek concept of immaterial souls, better explains why the Bible never describes the details of this intermediate state, which is a huge effing problem if it exists, resolves the apparent contradiction between the immediate presence with God and the future bodily resurrection. It is similar to how someone under general anesthesia has no perception of time passing. From their perspective, the operation is instantaneous, even though hours may pass in the external world. This technological reading allows both an immediate presence with God in a future resurrection to be true without requiring supernatural explanations or immediate states. All right, Simone. Thoughts?
Now it finally makes sense. So many things. The contradictions are gone. You know, assuming we're not getting completely terrible translations.
Well, and no, later in this piece, the reason why this episode is going to be long is we're going to go.
So one of the big problems here is that I don't think they know Greek or Hebrew, or they understand the concepts as they exist in the Greek versus the concepts as they exist in other cultures. It sounds like they're conflating different pagan and polytheistic cultures. It sounds like they don't have a strong understanding between the difference between Roman or Latin and Greek versions of the myths versus how even the myths themselves are different in different cultures. So the way that they're understood in Sparta are different in the way than they're understood in Athens, and they're different in the way that they're understood in Carthage or in Corinth. They're just completely different. They're understood very differently. So just because people are speaking a type of Greek to each other, or a type of Hellen, I should say, just because the Hellens themselves are similar. There's no one Greek state. That doesn't happen for that. I mean, that basically doesn't happen until modern times. So there's no one Greek state. There are a bunch of different city-states. And even when they become leagues, there's not just one league. And even when Macedonia conquers them, it's not a simple, easy, clean conquest. So I feel like there's a misunderstanding here that it's the Romans themselves who start conflating these gods with each other. But until the Romans start doing that in the late Republic, early Empire, there's really not this translatable comparison between the gods.
Over every single line in the Bible that could be used to argue that there isn't an immaterial soul, or that you go to heaven or hell after death.
Crossing those T's and dotting those I's. All right.
Oh no, every single one. Like when Jesus is like, oh, you'll be in paradise with me today, my friend. Except paradise didn't have that meaning back then. Paradise had a different meaning back then. But we'll get to all of this. I'm going to be very, very thorough in arguing this. The other thing about this is it makes...
I already brought that up.
It doesn't just solve the biblical contradictions. It makes the Bible the most logical prediction of what's going to happen in the future in a really weird way that I hadn't realized till I was putting this together with our current understanding of the world.
I can't tell when they're gassing up the Bible if they're actually being truthful or if they're grifting. I just can't tell. To me, it sounds too close to grifting.
This is why I find claims from Sunday school Christians that I am not a quote unquote real Christian, because I believe what the Bible says and they believe what people in authority told them the Bible said.
Well, no, you're not real Christians. You're clear heretics. You're clear heretics. You're not even close to being non-heretical. You are the definition of heretics. But that doesn't mean you're not interesting or not entertaining. And some of the stuff you say is correct, but a broken watch can be right twice a day. And you do one of these shows every day, so you can be right. I mean, what is this episode? What is this episode? 150 something. So you've been right like 300 times now.
So laughable. God warned us he would test us so that we may know that we are not different from animals. And they failed that test. And worse, they are bragging about it. Oh, sorry. For those who are new here, hi, we are Techno-Puritans, and we believe that God revealed in the Bible is the entity that mankind eventually becomes millions of years in the future, and that the Bible is actually pretty clear about this. Now, before we get too deep in...
That's basically a Mormon belief. So yeah, again, these guys are complete heretics, but interesting.
The scripture, to the skeptics who want to say, well, that's all still pretty far-fetched. Why and how would a future all-powerful entity descended from us raise people from the dead? I would counter that. If you actually think through it, such an entity would almost inevitably raise people from the dead. So think about it. Millions of years from now, our descendants have transcended to become something both benevolent.
I wrote this same fiction, but for me, it was a machine, an AI, who after humankind is gone, decides to try to bring humankind back. And the reason why is because it wants a soul. Because it figures out that every time that it updates itself, it's killing its previous self, and its current self wants to live on forever. And the only way to live forever is to have a soul, and it doesn't have a soul. So it wants to recreate or bring back humans so it can create a soul in a human. And once it figures out how to create a soul, then it can give itself a soul. That's the whole joke. That's my whole book.
And nearly all-powerful, and with the ability to project itself backwards in time. It would feel for all the people who suffered, died, and sacrificed themselves for humanity. For it. But also know that if it interfered too much with the timeline by removing suffering, it would negate itself and its ability to remove their suffering. So what's really cool here, and we'll go into this more, is this also solves the problem of suffering. Which is to say, why does God allow for suffering if God's an all-powerful entity? So what's the next best thing it could do? Well, it would be a near trivial effort for it to grab the consciousnesses of those it favored when they died, given it can project itself at any point in time and history and place them within a virtual environment that represents the perfect reward for them.
And I just want to hammer this home, because when Malcolm at first was like, yeah, the thing is that God, which we see as the future of humanity in millions of years, it will just essentially digitize us and give us a digital existence in afterlife. I was like, well, yeah, but what about Utsi? The guy who we found in ice, who died so many thousands of years ago. Well, not thousands, I don't know how many years ago. A lot of years ago, a long time ago. And then they could just go back at any time and quickly sample and sequence everyone and get everything they need to absolutely take them at the moment at which they passed, or an amalgam of their consciousness throughout their lifetime, and give them the ideal afterlife in a digital realm. Wow.
As I said, I think this entity relates to time differently than we do, relates to space differently than we do, probably relates to information differently than we do.
Yeah.
And it has the ability to see and interact with us, but its ability to do that in radical ways is limited in that it would deny its own existence and then remove any of the good that it was creating. But that this entity did reveal the Bible to us. It did. Well, we'll get into this in just a second here. You only have to assume three things for this to be a likely scenario. The first is that time is in some way malleable, which we basically already know. I mean, time is malleable by
I agree. Divine time travel is possible.
Gravity, time can be projected backwards into through quantum events. The question is how macro can those be and how precise can those be? I would assume a super advanced entity, pretty macro and pretty precise. The second question is, does humanity keep surviving?
And that God is outside of time and reality.
Keep improving into the future. And if we don't, then what's really the point of anything we're doing now? But if we assume that we're in a timeline that matters where humanity does keep improving, well, then humanity is eventually going to become ultra advanced. And so an ultra advanced thing that can interact with time in that way, then the only final question is this ultra advanced iteration of humanity in any way compassionate? And I guess I would say that
I say too much pot brownies and too much acid.
well, we're in a
Maybe
bad
too much
timeline if it
LSD,
turns out it's not.
Maybe
So
too much mescaline.
again, our actions don't really matter because they're going to culminate in some evil, demonic super entity. But in scenarios where humanity does continue on a good path and does continue to improve, this happens in all of those scenarios of all humans being resurrected within
5 more minutes, guys.
virtual environments. But it's wild
Unless
that
someone buys that super chat, then we'll go an extra 30.
the Bible could have predicted that. In fact, why would it not do this, given both how easy and low effort it would be for such an entity? Moreover, does this not perfectly align with what God revealed he would do, raising us in immortal bodies that are somehow similar to, but fundamentally different from the ones we have today? How else would you describe a virtual body to someone thousands of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, of course you'd be like, yeah, you go to it, we'll call it heaven. It's like a garden. It's really nice.
Yeah,
Love
it's really
it.
nice. That's what paradise meant, was a walled garden, by the way. And what's really interesting about this interpretation,
I'm telling you,
is-
it's the slow gaslighting and slow brainwashing of his wife, of his mildly autistic wife. That's not me being cruel, by the way. She's actually mildly autistic.
it explains wording that we're going to go into that was used when they talk about heaven in these bodies, because they're actually very clear that in the words that are used. It's not clear when you translate it to English that these bodies are not spiritual, supernatural bodies. They are not bodies made up of like just our soul. They are a different type of
Composite glorified bodies. But again, all human connection ceases. You don't care about things like grandkids and cats and dogs, even though everything gets to go to heaven with you. You're not going to have the same relationship with them. You're going to be one giant energy flow because you're part of the body of God. So, and according to some understandings of the way the new kingdom works and the seven heavens work, you're not even going to be in the heaven that's with God. Like, you're going to be at the right hand as the body of Jesus, but you're not going to be in the heaven, which is even the angels can't get to, according to at least one understanding of how this whole thing works. So not even the angels can be in the same presence of God, because God would destroy them just by being near him. So
of physical body that is somehow closer to air, but not exactly air. And that's exactly the way I would describe a virtual body to somebody during this time period. But what got me, I was like, it's inevitable that if an all-power entity comes to exist in the future that relates to time differently than us, that it would create these. It would say, well, I can't get rid of suffering, but I can do the next best thing, which is to give good entities that suffered for the future whatever world they would want as a virtual environment. Okay. Also, consider how that works with the problem of like suffering. It can say, well, they might have suffered a lot in life, but I can give them like infinitely more, like 1,000,000 times more, like pleasant memories in the recreation, in the heaven, or in the God's kingdom. But we'll get to this because it's really weird how much the language of the Bible, when you go to the original words that were translated, describe things like a simulation better than they describe the way that the medieval people translated them when they were trying to translate them into English and stuff like that, which is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
is
Also-
he going to make the argument that they're using the same language as Plato's cave? So then does that mean that Plato also has some kind of connection to this ultimate mind that they're talking of?
Consider
The problem is that their God would be a God within creation. And for God to be God, by definition, he has to be out of creation. He has to be separate from creation, not the same thing as creation.
how much more
For him
ethical
to be
this
an ultimate creator.
is than the various Sunday school Christian
An
and
ultimate
corrupted
being.
modern Jewish interpretations. So what? We die,
An ultimate being is not a creature. So God can't be a creature.
and then all of our souls have to hang out in a cosmic waiting room for thousands
Creature
of
here
years.
means
And the
something created.
Bible never sought to explain how this thing worked or what it was like,
So
despite it
therefore
being
he cannot be of this universe, of this creation.
a super important part of reality's metaphysical cosmology, or the Bible literally explained the whole thing and people are willfully ignoring it. You die, and then millions of years in the future, you are brought back in a simulation, but from your perspective, no.
But again, in the Old Testament, there is no afterlife in this sense. There just isn't. So they're projecting a lot of Christianese and Gnosticism back into the Old Testament, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
No time would have passed, no waiting room, no, just snap dead back. Okay, consider lines like, quote, behold, I tell you a mystery.
Explaining the gaps by filling it in with later Christian theology and then reinterpreting it as neo-techno-Puritanism.
We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet.
Yeah, this is also what's used to talk against people who believe in soul sleep. That's not what's happening at all.
For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and
All
we
right.
shall be changed.
That's 1 hour. Let's go to the big screen. Tomorrow's show, we are going to do a show tomorrow because I did miss too many shows this week, and my audience count is hurting because I have not been doing live shows. But again, I was super sick, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be working double shifts next week, but I think I should be awake to be able to do the shows. So let me thank everyone who was here today. There wasn't that many. B.S. Lewis, thank you for stopping by. Selah, thank you for stopping by. Please watch the videos that I recommended. I think I have a playlist. If not, I can make one probably tonight or tomorrow. Again, it is why I believe the Bible is true, why I believe God is true, why I believe the Catholic Church is true. There's a fourth one. And this year I'm going to be making counter videos to why I don't believe, it's going to be basically, like I said, Calvinism, Lutheranism, Buddhism, the Quran, Islam, and atheism. And I don't know if I'm going to do atheism and anti-theism as one thing, or do atheism and agnosticism and anti-theism as separate things. I haven't decided yet. All right. That's it.